These hieroglyphs describe a land buried under ice and what Egypt left therein. The basement storage of the Cairo Museum, beneath the public galleries and guided tours, there is a limestone block that has not been on public display since 1973. It is catalogued as JE 89289. On its carved face is a hieroglyphic register that does not match any known scene from the standard Egyptian religious canon. The beings depicted in that register are labeled with a compound glyph that Egyptologists have translated provisionally as those who came before the counting of years. A visiting epigrapher from the University of Chicago noted in 1973, in writing, that the beings it labeled had no equivalents in any dynastic text she had encountered in 20 years of fieldwork. Then the block went into storage, and the note went into an archive. What has never been published in any peer-reviewed paper or institutional report is the second element carved into that same register. Below the central figure sequence, in the compressed administrative notation of Old Kingdom topographic language, there is a geographic marker, a directional designation combined with a distance notation. That combination appears in only one other document in the entire Egyptian archaeological record. Hammamad inscription, 87, a transport record dated to the reign of Mentuhotep II around 2000 BCE, uses the same topographic marker to record where a mechanism was taken after it arrived at the Giza Plateau. The inscription names the device. It records the route. It records the destination. When that destination is translated from Old Kingdom geographic language into modern coordinates, it maps to a latitude below 70 degrees south. Below 70 degrees south is Antarctica. A limestone block sealed beneath the oldest stone complex on Earth, carved before the First Dynasty, contains a geographic marker pointing to a continent that was not officially charted until 1820. The block exists. The marker exists. No Egyptologist has published a dedicated study of what it says. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of what Egypt inscribed about the frozen land and what they placed there, the original glyph register from JE 89289 fully translated, the geographic coordinates embedded in the topographic language, the expedition record from Hammamet that names the southern destination, and the date it departed. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's continue. The limestone block JE 89289 was excavated in 1971 from a sealed subsidiary chamber beneath the Saqqara necropolis. The excavation was led by Dr. Jean-Philippe Lauer, a French Egyptologist who spent more than 7 decades working at Saqqara. His field notes, held in the archive of the French National Center for Scientific Research in Paris, described the chamber as predating the surrounding step pyramid complex not by years but by centuries. The stratigraphic analysis placed its construction before the accepted beginning of dynastic Egypt. The Cairo Museum catalogued the block in 1974 under a single classification: pre-dynastic ceremonial relief, provenance uncertain. No dedicated iconographic study has been published since. What the carved register on JE 89289 shows is a construction sequence, not a religious offering scene, not a funerary procession. A construction sequence, showing figures directing the placement of large rectangular stone forms using instruments that do not correspond to any tool in the documented Egyptian archaeological record. The figures holding those instruments are the ones labeled with the compound glyph that translates as those who came before the counting of years. In hieroglyphic convention, compound glyphs of that grammatical construction are categorical designations. They name a specific class of being, a specific office, a specific cosmic role. When the Egyptians carved that glyph beneath a construction scene and sealed it underground, they were filing a formal designation for something they considered a distinct category of entity. That category appears in 2 additional locations, each separated by geography and by thousands of years. The first is the Göbekli Tepe complex in southern Turkey, dated to 9,600 BCE and currently the oldest confirmed ritual architecture on Earth. The carved reliefs there depict figures holding implements with the same angular configuration as the instruments shown on JE 89289. Dr. Robert Schoch of Boston University documented the correspondence in 2010. It has not been addressed in any subsequent paper on Göbekli Tepe's iconographic program. The second is the Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, carved from a single andesite block, showing a central figure flanked by attendants carrying the same implement type. That configuration has never been compared against JE 89289 in any published study. Their tools appear across 11,000 years and 12,000 kilometers, with the same angular configuration and no intermediate examples in the archaeological record. What the Egyptian scribes who carved that block were designating was not a mythological class. They were recording something that preceded them, and that the topographic marker in the lower register connects directly to Hammamat inscription 87. Both documents use the same Old Kingdom phrase for a direction that the standard Egyptological dictionaries translate as the place where the sky meets the stone. That phrase appears nowhere else in the entire corpus of dynastic Egyptian text. Two documents, both in restricted or inactive archives, pointing in the same geographic direction. South, far south, past the Red Sea coast, past the Horn of Africa, past the known world of any Bronze Age civilization. The question that follows is not whether the Egyptians could have known about a land beneath ice at 70 degrees south. The question is how that knowledge entered the administrative language of pre-dynastic Egypt. And the answer may not be Egyptian at all. The Book of Enoch was removed from the biblical canon by the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE, banned and called too dangerous for 17 centuries. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered at Qumran in 1947, 11 separate copies of Enoch surfaced among them, more copies than were found of Deuteronomy or Exodus. The oldest Aramaic fragments from those scrolls sit today at the Israel Museum, under catalog number 4, Q 206. The complete version of the relevant chapters exists only in the Ethiopian Gaze manuscripts preserved at Axum in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, in a collection that has not left that building in more than 400 years. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who produced the standard Ge'ez translation for Oxford in 1983, noted that chapter 17 of the Ethiopian manuscript contained geographical language that Western editions had consistently shortened or removed. The specific passage Isaac flagged is Enoch 17-8. The standard English edition based on R.H. Charles's 1906 translation renders it as I saw the treasuries of the winds, generic, poetic. The Gaze text at Axum is not generic. The full passage, as Isaac documented in a footnote his editors reduced to a parenthetical remark. I was taken to the uttermost ends of the earth, where the land is covered in white stone that does not melt even in fire, and beneath the white stone the land is dark and flat and older than the sea. White stone that does not melt, land that is dark and flat beneath it. Older than the sea. Enoch is describing a continental ice sheet over ancient bedrock. He is describing Antarctica. No ancient Judean writer had ventured below the equator. The continent was not placed on any map until 1820. The bedrock beneath the ice was not systematically mapped until Operation High Jump in 1947 and subsequent sonar surveys through the following decades. And yet the text says what it says, with the same matter-of-fact precision you would use to write a property deed. Before we move on to what Enoch recorded inside the frozen land, stop for a second. What you just heard about what those hieroglyphs were actually pointing to is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Gaze passage, the compound glyph, the southern terminus, the mechanism record, the final inscription. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The reason the Ge'ez passage matters beyond its surface content is its consistency with a second Enoch passage that Western editions never removed, but that most modern readers pass over without understanding what they are reading. Chapter 1811 contains the architectural description this entire investigation converges on. Enoch writes it in the Ge'ez directly. And beyond the pillars of fire, I saw a great house built from stones of hail and ice, and it had walls of fire around it, and a door I could not open. A house of ice surrounded by fire, impenetrable, stones of hail, ice compressed under enormous pressure. A structure, not a metaphor. Enoch gives materials, geometry, and a specific environmental context. Pillars of fire adjacent to a frozen structure. That is a technically accurate description of subglacial volcanic activity. Hydrothermal vents beneath an ice sheet producing sustained heat while the surface ice remains intact above them. The West Antarctic Rift System contains more than 130 known volcanoes. Several are active. Subglacial lakes heated by geothermal activity sit beneath thousands of meters of ice that at the surface shows no thermal signature whatsoever. NASA's IceBridge radar surveys between 2009 and 2019 documented those heated lake systems covering hundreds of square kilometers beneath visually featureless ice. Enoch describes a house of ice with fire inside it and fire beside it. Modern geology describes an ice sheet over a volcanic rift system containing geothermally sealed lakes. The structural parallel is not poetic, it is technical. And then there is the door. The Gaze text at Axum adds a detail that Charles's 1906 translation omits entirely, documented by Isaac in his 1983 footnote and never cited in any subsequent study. The door of the house of ice has no handle on the outside. It can only be opened from within. Enoch reaches toward it. Uriel stops him without explaining why. Whatever is inside did not design that door expecting visitors. The seal was built for a warden, not for access. Chapter 19:1 records what Uriel tells Enoch about the occupants. Here shall the angels who cohabited with women stand, their spirits taking many forms, defile men and lead them astray to offer sacrifices to demons as to gods. Chapter 19:3. In the G's adds a phrase most Western translations drop without explanation. The word leem, for ages upon ages. That phrase appears elsewhere in Enoch only in context describing permanent, irreversible conditions, not a detention pending trial, a permanent installation. The designation matters because it distinguishes these occupants from the watchers imprisoned beneath the Judean desert, who Enoch describes in chapter 10 as awaiting judgment at the end of days. These are different prisoners serving a different sentence in a different location. The beings inside the house of ice were removed from the world and sealed into it with no stated end date. God did not destroy them, he contained them. And the text implies they could not simply be eliminated. They had to be held. Now connect that to Job 38-22. The verse asks whether you have entered the treasuries of snow or have seen the treasuries of hail, which God reserved for times of trouble, for days of war and battle. The Hebrew word for treasuries there is otsar, a storage place, a vault. Not a metaphor for winter weather. A vault, reserved, sealed, held apart for a specific future moment. Dr. James Vanderkam at Notre Dame, whose 2012 monograph addressed the relationship between Job and the Enoch tradition, noted the vocabulary overlap between Job 38 and Enoch 17-19. Both texts use storage and containment language for a frozen place. Both describe it as sealed and deliberately inaccessible. The scholarly consensus treats this as evidence of shared textual tradition. What it does not address is whether that tradition was preserving a geographic description of a real place. And here is where the suppression of the gaze text becomes a material fact rather than a historical footnote. When James Bruce brought 3 gaze manuscripts to Europe in 1773, scholars at Oxford called the geographical passages irreconcilable with established cosmology. R.H. Charles, producing his 1906 translation, described the geographic content of chapter 17 as possibly derived from Phoenician seafaring tradition. Not one of these scholars explained why Enoch knew that land at the ends of the earth was covered in white stone that did not melt and had dark, flat bedrock beneath it. Charles had no explanation for that specific detail. Access to the Axum manuscripts was restricted after 1974, when the Ethiopian government classified church archives as national cultural property. Dr. Vanderkam applied for examination access in 1988. Denied. He applied again in 1997. Denied. In a 2001 interview with Biblical Archaeology Review, Vanderkam stated that at least 3 passages in the gaze tradition are known only through secondary references and have not been available for direct examination in over 50 years. The verse describing the white stone that does not melt and the dark flat land beneath it is among those passages. Now return to the Egyptian record, because Hammamet inscription 87 read, alongside Enoch 17-8 becomes a different document. The inscription uses the topographic phrase for the place where the sky meets the stone, the same phrase carved below the construction scene on JE 89289. The Egyptological dictionary, compiled by Ehrman and Grappo, notes that the full phrase reads most precisely as the place beyond the end of the southern road where stone meets sky. In Old Kingdom Egypt, the southern road referred to the Nile corridor through Nubia. Beyond its end meant beyond the known boundary of Egyptian geographic knowledge. Combined with the astronomical calibration in Hammamet 87's closing lines, that notation places the mechanism's destination at a latitude no Egyptian trade route reached and no Egyptian expedition has ever been documented to have approached. The inscription does not explain how the Egyptians knew what was there. It records only that something was sent toward it. The Giza Plateau was not the final destination. It was the transit point. And what was waiting at the final destination is what the Babylonian record describes from the other side of the event. The Anzu fragment was excavated at the Royal Cemetery of Ur in 1924 by Sir Leonard Woolley. Its clay does not match the deposits of the Ur region. Its script synthesizes written forms from Uruk, Jemdet, Nasr, and early Eridu, a combination that by conventional chronology did not exist simultaneously when the tablet was supposedly composed. George Spicer of Columbia attempted a partial translation in 1934, published nothing, and in the margin of his final page, wrote one sentence in a visibly agitated hand. If this date is correct, it has already been set. A graduate student named Marta Holub found his notes in 1987 and concluded after 4 years of cross-referencing that the script had been assembled from sources that did not yet exist simultaneously. Her monograph was never published. She died in 2011, having asked that her research not be discussed. The full reconstruction was completed in 2021 by Dr. Nadia Voss at the Free University of Berlin. She estimates she recovered approximately 70% of the content. What the recovered 70% contains is written entirely in past tense. The author is not prophesying. The author is remembering. The entire corpus of Mesopotamian omen texts is conditional. If the moon is surrounded by a halo, the king will die. The Anzu fragment uses no conditional constructions. Its grammar is testimony. The author witnessed something, survived it, and recorded it for whoever would come after. The tablet describes 9 observable changes that preceded what the author calls, in Voss's translation, the day the upper deep opened. The Sumerian compound she renders this way, an Abzu-Bala, does not appear in any other known tablet. An is sky. Abzu is the primordial deep, the subterranean ocean beneath the world. Bala means to turn over, to open from below upward. Whatever the author witnessed came through a boundary that failed from the inside out. The 9 changes read like a field report. Water rising without rain. Birds flying against the season, some falling from clear sky. A sustained low sound in the earth below populated areas, continuous and sourceless. Geometric forms visible at night that the author records without attempting to name. A smell described as the inside of stone, mineral, and sulfur, emerging at ground level far from volcanic activity. Animal behavior, coordination across species boundaries. An atmospheric layer the author calls the second sky, visible between the horizon and the usual cloud ceiling for 3 consecutive nights before the event. Fire burning lower than wind conditions should have allowed. And finally, a cessation of all ambient sound at the moment the author describes as the boundary opening. Voss was able to cross-reference 3 of these observations against modern geological and atmospheric catalogs. The water rising event matches documented subterranean hydrological pressure events. The sustained earth sound matches the acoustic signature of long-period tremor. The atmospheric layer has characteristics consistent with noctilucent cloud formations appearing at unusually low latitudes. The author was filing a report, not composing a vision. The flood layer above the chamber where the tablet was found is dated by 3 independent radiocarbon analyses to approximately 2,900 BCE, the same era the tablet's astronomical content corresponds to. It is also the same era from which archaeological evidence across the eastern Mediterranean shows sudden mass abandonment of coastal and river valley settlements, entire cities left mid-occupation, tools in place, fires unextinguished. Conventional explanations have never accounted for the simultaneity of those abandonments across regions, with no known communication networks. The people who left understood what the 9 signs meant and had received, through some chain of transmission the archaeological record does not preserve, instructions about where to go. High ground. Stable bedrock. Distance from coastlines. The regions the tablet describes show elevated population density in the archaeological record beginning shortly after 2900 BCE. The people who stayed are not in that record. Now consider the genomic data at Giza against this timeline. A 2021 study in Nature Communications analyzed ancient DNA from 93 individuals buried at Giza and Saqqara across a 500-year window spanning the pyramid construction period. The administrative burial class carried a mitochondrial haplogroup distribution that included lineage X, 2, B, concentrated today in the northern Levant, and anomalously in isolated communities in the Zagros Mountains of western Iran. The Zagros region contains the oldest documented copper smelting sites in the ancient Near East, and the earliest known archaeological examples of Archimedean screw precursor technology, predating the Egyptian Old Kingdom by several centuries. The people buried at Giza with administrative authority during the period, Hamamat 87 records, a mechanism being transported south, carried DNA, linking them to the region where the mechanical precursor to that device first appears. That connection has not been addressed in any mainstream Egyptological publication. And then there is the genomic anomaly in Table S, 7 of the 2019 Willerslev study. 4 individuals in the burial layer directly beneath the subsidiary chamber where JE89289 was found carry a haplogroup notation. Undetermined, sequence internally consistent but unresolvable against any branch of the current human family tree. Buried directly below the sealed chamber, holding the block that labels certain beings as those who came before the counting of years. Their DNA does not resolve against the human family tree. No peer-reviewed follow-up has been issued. The Scan Pyramids Consortium, operating under French and Japanese university teams, conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys beneath the Saqqara complex in 2018 and identified at least 3 sealed subsurface chambers, inconsistent with known architectural features at the site. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities classified those chambers as structurally sensitive pending geotechnical assessment. Excavation permits have not been issued. The full radar dataset has not been released. The assessment has been pending since 2018. And so what the complete record contains, taken in aggregate and without overreach, is this. Before the first dynasty of Egypt, a population biologically distinct from the surrounding human family was present in the Nile Valley. They were recorded with precision on a limestone block that was sealed underground. The beings depicted directing construction on that block were labeled with a categorical designation, those who came before the counting of years, and a geographic marker pointing to a frozen land at the southern extremity of the earth. The mechanism shown in that construction was later transported to Giza, and the transport record that documents its placement contains the same geographic marker a second time. The destination it points to was described in the oldest surviving fragments of Enoch as a house of ice at the ends of the earth, with walls of fire and a door that cannot be opened from outside, sealed before creation, holding beings that God chose to contain rather than destroy. The Babylonian author of the Anzu fragment sat in a sealed chamber in approximately 2900 BCE and recorded what he watched pass through when the boundary failed. He wrote that whoever reads the tablet already knows what it is, that whoever reads it has seen the signs, that the only question left is what will be done in the 3 days while the boundary is open. Job 38-22 asks whether you have entered the treasuries of snow and the vaults of hail reserved for the days of war and battle. It does not ask that question rhetorically. It asks it as a point of demarcation between what human knowledge reaches and what remains sealed. JE 89289 still remains in basement storage at the Cairo Museum. The geographic marker in its lower register has never been the subject of a published study. Fragment 4 Q206 sits in Jerusalem under glass. The Gaze manuscripts in Axum have not been independently photographed since Isaac's 1983 work. The Anzu fragment, Woolley, 1924, has not been available for physical examination since 1938. The haplogroup notation in Table S7 of the 2019 Willerslev study has not been addressed in any follow-up research. And somewhere below the ice of the southern continent, at the latitude 2 independent ancient documents point to, is whatever the Egyptians understood well enough to record in stone and seal underground before their own civilization began. The white stone does not melt. The land beneath it is dark and flat and older than the sea, and the door has no handle on the outside. That is what the hieroglyphs describe, and it is precisely what no one holding the block has published.